Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Choe, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Choe.
Welcome in, Joe Choe with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you for those that are following us on Facebook. We appreciate that very much. We're continuing to grow the audience on Facebook, and that's important because we want to try to reach as many people as we can and deliver as much education and information as we can. For most of you that have been following the show for almost 8 years, with the live radio and podcast now, the focus it always has been education information. What we try to do is have great guests like today, partnerships, shows, content information, really to pass along to you, the consumer, not to make you an expert so much, but to just educate you, get you some information so when you're deciding to do anything in and around real estate, you know who to partner with, who to connect with, and those relationships connect. However, most of you also know, if you've been following the show the last couple of years, we've stepped out of the box a bit, and we've created some new shows that have been a lot of fun. One has been with Jack Russo. We started, just about a year and a half ago, and we've been doing a show first on starting something new. It's about entrepreneurship in the Silicon Valley, and in a minute I'll have Jack explain and go through and what he does, but he's been on the show now. We did a first series of starting something new, and this year we are kicking off growing your business. We're doing certain segments and subtitles of that, so he's got a guest on he'll introduce in just a moment as well. For more information, go to RERL-1647.com, and we'd love to have you download the podcast. It's great that you guys are watching us on Facebook, and thank you for the feedback that we're getting. We continue to grow the audience, thousands by the month. We love that, but if you have not yet done so, download the podcast. Just go anywhere online, type in Real Estate Radio Live. You'll see the podcast and download. That way you could follow the show at your convenience. All right, let me bring in our partner here, Jack Russo, who is the managing partner at the Computer Law Group in Palo Alto. For those who have been following the show, you're probably familiar, but what I'll do is have Jack come in. He is linked in from his office in Palo Alto doing a show, and I'll have him come in and give everybody an update on himself and then invite the guest in. Good to have you back, Jack.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Thanks for doing this by the Zoom approach because we couldn't quite get down to your office and your radio booth in Los Gatos. That would have really delayed the show and delayed the rest of the commitments that exist here. But we're doing this sort of live on Zoom, and I'm lucky enough to have really one of my youngest but oldest clients. That he's a very young entrepreneur, still young at heart and actually young age-wise. But I met him many decades ago. In fact, we were just reminiscing. Maybe it's going on 3 decades ago. I mean, he doesn't look that old. I must have met him when he was 9 years old or something. I mean, he looks so young, and I'm going to make sure his wife gets this. Because applause to her in keeping him so young and so young-looking. And he's really a globetrotter. He's in, actually, from London. His company has the main offices in London, Keesup Choe. His offices are in London, but he also has now come to plant a flag in the United States to grow the business that started, and he'll explain his journey, in England, in London. Mm-hmm. And with the many employees he has there, he's now growing a business that is essentially a branch, I guess, subsidiary or branch, here in the United States. And obviously growing customers when you're an international business means you have to be willing to travel. It typically means you have to take lots of money. And we've been talking about these 7 essences of growth, where you have to have a good team. Obviously, the team has to execute on a technology. Obviously, the technology has to have some customer demand. And obviously, you typically need financing to add gas to the fire. I think he's done it pretty amazingly without adding venture capital or private equity, though I think he has been offered both and just organically grown this. So I thought he'd be a perfect guest, given that he's here in town, to talk about that journey.
Great.
So I want to introduce Keesup Choe, the CEO. The company is now called Predict.X.
Yeah.
I knew it by a different name, but you'll tell a little bit about that story. But Keesup was actually born in California, weren't you? So tell us how because you've been in Silicon Valley, but then you made your way to England. Is there an abbreviated version of how you did this and stayed so young in the process?
Not so young looking. It's due to the fact that we're fortunate to have low resolution video, I think.
No, he looks great. He actually looks great.
Yeah, I met Jack with my first startup. Our office is right on University Avenue, and I didn't even know that there was such a thing as corporate counsel. But there you go. That was lucked into meeting Jack, and it's been a friend and confidant, and did some work together over the years as well. So I've been in a few different startups in the Valley. Every one of them was venture funded. And I think there's sort of an assumption, which is probably true, especially in the Valley, that capital is required. And mainly, I think, is two things. One is, I think talent is more expensive, if we're being honest.
A lot more expensive. Yeah.
And number two, that same talent has a certain expectation. And when they have choice, not only do they want stock options, but they want it in a stock option of a venture-funded company because they think that potentially makes it more stable. And maybe there's a little bonus at Series B, Series C, right? And also that there might be a liquidity event. I don't necessarily think that's the case, and there's certainly for new entrepreneurs a lot of discipline and learning that the good VCs bring to the table. I think it's very valuable. But having kind of been around the block a few times and also wanting to try to do it slightly differently, that's why Predict.X doesn't have venture money. But having said that, I don't think it would have been possible in the Valley in the same way. It's just to start up outside the Valley is cheaper. It's less capital. And in London, even though it's an expensive city, I was able to do that. But, everything has to fall in line. Yeah.
You have to have a fair amount of luck.
Well, also
in the way.
Luck, and you need to understand and deal with the pressure of actually having to build a product that you can sell straight away. I think in some ways that's a good pressure versus, say, I'm sure, Jack, you know of many companies who got seed funding who kind of lost their way or didn't quite produce the MVP, maybe never got the Series A, etc. And sometimes having money up front isn't necessarily the right thing.
It could be a curse. Yeah. Some teams do better struggling without money because they value things so much better.
Yeah.
And they don't waste anything. Everything gets used in one way or another. I mean, you're like that, Joe. I mean,
it forces you to be more creative, and I think and hungry, and really, there's that edge I think we all need. I learned it from baseball, being a competitive baseball player. There's a bit of that edge that, when you have to try to get whatever edge you can, and sometimes you don't always have the luxury. In this case, you're talking about having the money. So it forces you to look alternatively, creatively, and, strategically, and I think that's a good thing, especially to begin with.
What I would also add to that comment is that in general, when you're scraping around looking for customers, you listen more carefully to the customer.
Good point.
If you've got $50 million in the bank from the VC or even $5 million in the bank from the VC, the customer is sort of like a distraction. I hate to put it that way because it sounds so derogatory, but I think Keesup has been much better at listening to the customer and then realizing, gosh, we've got to add this, and you'll tell us more about what Predict.X does. But in general, I think you're really good at listening to the customer and paying really close attention to what they want and what the market wants.
Exactly. So those product decisions, the danger of not doing that, listening to the customer, is actually designing something because you think something should exist in the market that doesn't. And that's not easy to do. And the other, I think, important thing about not having funding versus having funding is that, especially the seed funding, is that was funded from pretty much a business plan. And if you deviate from that, so maybe you start along the journey, the market actually is different than what you thought, and you actually need to create a different product or different positioning or something that's outside of the business plan. You can't just do it like this. It doesn't mean you can't, but you need to go through the steps of convincing the VCs this pivot is the right pivot, so on and so forth. Whereas without that, I'm free to really test lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to work? Is that going to work? And in fact, the journey that we're on and where we ended up, I'm not sure it would have been possible in that same way anyway, because we would have maybe tried to execute something far too long to figure out it was a dead end. And now I never actually had to pivot, because a pivot means you're changing everything about your company to, it's exactly the same company.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's just the way the product's packaged is slightly different. The way our position is slightly different, et cetera. So we never pivoted because we're testing lots of different things.
It's a big point, Joe, because you have not yet had the indulgence of having a venture capital partner.
Right.
Keesup is a serial entrepreneur. He's had several rounds of different venture capital partners in several different businesses, not the current one. But his point, which is really well taken, and I just want to amplify it, is when you have a venture capital partner, it's like having a wife or a spouse, which is you don't want to change the charter of the marriage without seeing how they feel about changing the charter. And often they're going to say, are you really sure? Because the business plan sounded really good to begin with, and that's why we invested, and that's what we sold our partners on. But now you're moving in the direction of, say, analytics, when before you were in a direction of control. Or, somewhere in this, it may stifle some creativity, is really what the problem can be.
Another way to maybe test this, if you're an entrepreneur, is actually, I think good venture capitalists are also investing in the team and the founder.
Right. Yes.
And if they trust the founder, then they're much more likely to empower that person to change tact and deviate from the plan, versus other VCs who actually are trying to, they like the space.
Yes.
They like the proposition.
Yes.
And this team is good as any to execute it.
Yes.
This is two different
I think Elon Musk gets a lot of sway. We use him often. I think Steve Jobs did too, which is, hey, I want to build a phone. I don't think that anyone would say to Elon Musk, if he wanted to build a Tesla phone, or Steve Jobs, 20 years ago or 30 years ago said, I want to build a phone. I don't think they would have said, get lost, that's crazy. They would say, wow, that's brilliant. Why do you think it's going to sell? Tell us more about your vision. They would think, hey, this is some sort of visionary who sees a better phone. And in fact, that's one of the things that the person is investing in, that vision, that idea that Tesla is going to come up with something electrified. Maybe it'll be a motorcycle next. I don't know. That will just be earth-shattering, even more earth-shattering than their electric cars.
Yeah. Talking about the difference with the venture capitalists and the relationships with them, obviously if you have a track record like you did, it's probably a little bit easier, but that brings up a good point you and Jack both address is, you have to be nimble, and if you're heading down one direction, I'm very familiar with that. You write the plan, everything's in this direction. But as you start talking to your customers or you find something out, you wait a minute, I'm going to pivot and move in this direction. That's a good point. So obviously if you're venture backed, are you saying that could become problematic because then you have to go back and get their okay and their blessing versus just moving in that direction, or does that depend on the relationship you have with them?
Well, I would say whether you have a venture fund or not, those are really strategic decisions is a board level decision. It just happens the venture VCs are sitting on the board, right?
Right.
So you need to convince and get buy-in from the board no matter
what
the composition is. Just so in our case, it's just me and my wife. So it's actually harder for me to convince her.
But you got a lot more time to talk to her about it.
But you see what I'm saying is that board when in a VC situation is a formalized scenario with minuted, and these decisions are debated in a much more formal way.
And they're slower. I think the other thing is they tend to be slower because people want to document how did we get there, and they want to be able to defend it. It's a little like a PhD dissertation. You got to defend it. Well, your previous dissertation topic was this. Now you're changing the topic, and why? Well, because the customers gave us this feedback. Well, maybe you didn't see enough customers. Maybe the customers are in a different segment. Maybe the customers are located in different geography. All those questions are going to be thrown at you, right, along the way.
What you really want is, as a venture capitalist who says, well, we invested in you because we trust you to execute and build a profitable company. What you don't want to hear is, and some of the big funds have big teams of analysts, right? Mm-hmm. It's very different machine these days than it used to be. So they could say, well, I'll have my analyst team look into this new idea.
And 3 months later, we'll give you a report, and that's going to slow everything down. But tell us more about Predict.X and where it started and how it got started, because your background is interesting. And I think, Pete, you just like you were the baseball player, he was like a famous jazz pianist in New York a decade ago. He hides that now. So he's a very mathematically oriented artist and Renaissance man. But tell us the journey that Predict.X, what happened there.
Well, Predict.X was the sort of meta, sort of very high level sort of thesis was that having been an early user of business intelligence software, and having been frustrated along the way, in essence, what I saw with people using these tools, instead of getting true value out of it in terms of making decisions, it was actually a prettier way to do a bar chart or something,
trivial.
Yeah. And the nature of these things, and there's value to doing that, okay? You want to make things look prettier for presentation purposes. In a high level, these things are used to report, to retrospective, to maybe you can analyze something and try to fix it after the fact, right?
Okay.
And what I thought was with the promise of AI machine learning, there's a whole new class of applications which is much more predictive. You can prevent, describe before the fact. So it's the whole, instead of spending 80% of the time fighting fires and fixing things, maybe you prevent them to happen in the first place. So that was the big, sort of the idea, and trying to build a platform and technologies that support that. And I guess what having venture money might have forced me to do, or what it might have had me explore, creating a huge platform of tools. Not having venture money meant that I had to focus in creating a solution that actually provided value straight away to a customer who could see it and say, okay, I can do something that I couldn't do before. I will actually pay you real money for that. That's the pressure that not having venture funding creates. So being forced to actually go to market, create a product, the whole product market fit, we didn't have to iterate on this thing. We just said, here's what they want, let's build it.
Where you were lucky enough to have a really big customer. Didn't you get the National Health Service in the UK? That's like the biggest government customer you can get in the United Kingdom. That's the entire health service, right?
They're probably the biggest employer.
In the world?
I think I saw one metric that they're either the second or third biggest employer. Number one is the Chinese Army.
Okay. Yeah. So they're huge. So this is nationalized health in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And you're looking at their big data in an abstract way to help them predict things that will save money for the government over the long run.
So
money and lives. That's even better.
So what we're rolling out now is in the social care system, identifying those patients likely to get admitted to a hospital.
Okay.
So they can get extra attention to prevent that from happening in the first place.
Okay.
Because once they go into hospital, not only on one side is massively expensive, on the other side, the well-being is diminished.
So you're trying to sort of predict who are the targets and maybe sending some home care to them?
Well, some of these are already in nursing homes.
Okay.
But instead of everyone getting the same general coverage, now there's an alert that we have to put more attention on Mr. Jones or whatever, and his condition is this, so we will actually monitor closer.
So, but the real generalization here is what you did or are doing for the National Health Service in London and maybe throughout England really can apply to like any big data, right? Big data that spews out of big companies, right?
That's right. So, and where our sweet spot has been in applying this on the expense side, not the revenue side.
Okay.
Because there seems to be actually a lot more potential to find savings there. So
To find savings and uncover fraud, maybe.
Uncover
too, right?
fraud, all of that.
Okay.
And because on the revenue side, a dollar increase from an EBITDA perspective is whittled away to whatever, maybe 20 cents, right?
Yes.
On the cost side, 1 for 1. Right?
Yes.
It hits EBITDA 1 for 1.
Yes.
So it's pretty compelling. And hence, that's been the focus of the company.
So you literally have a huge potential market, addressable market is huge, because I would say the Fortune 5,000 of the world should be all potentially able to save money through the use of the Predict.X tools. Is that what you call them? What's the actual name of the product? Is that a separate name?
No, it's Predict.X.
Predict.X.
Yeah, and no, it's you should try to have the same name for your product as your company if you can.
Yes.
You know, so that's another little tip for the entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And of course, sometimes the limiting factor is trying to get that domain name. But yes, but we're not in a big hurry, and that's the thing that not having a venture fund gives you some space to say, okay, well, let's actually make our customers really successful. And let's be an advocate. So we're a SaaS company, right? But and one of the metrics that SaaS companies are measured by is, you know, customer churn. How many have you lost, sort of thing.
Yes.
And last year it was 0. So we had 100.
Wow, that is a huge statement.
And I'm not sure that's possible if you're in hypergrowth mode, or i.e. just signing if you're just signing customers, you can grow faster, obviously.
Yes.
Can you really give them the attention they need to get the value and become that champion who'll stay with you?
Right.
You know? So it allows you to build that foundation longer, I think, rather than having to, we got to make the numbers look good because we're running out of cash and we need that Series B. So what do we do? You know, I have no concept of runway.
So this is the old-fashioned way of growing a business organically, customer by customer, achieving success, retaining the business, maybe expanding the business, and then just growing and all the hard work and travel and everything else that goes with it, which you have pulled off with a spouse as your partner, which is usually really hard to do. I mean, I think you get a big applause and your wife gets a big applause. Isha does great work, and it's an amazing story because I see, you know, my parents, as I said in one of the shows last year, they worked and they argued every day. And as kids, we always thought that they were about to get divorced. My mom was listening. No, you misinterpreted. Oh, she'd say, yeah, you're right. We almost did. But she's still alive at 89. And she says, that business was a 7x24, 365 day a week thing. And, you know, when they sold the business, they felt like, gosh, part of our life went away.
Yeah, right.
So it was like, gosh, what does that mean? What are we supposed to do now? And they realized they weren't really doing things together.
Yeah.
And of course, my dad started doing becoming an expert at poker and all sorts of wild things. You know, Keesup has met my parents, so he knows some of these stories. And my mom would curse him for going to Atlantic City or to Las Vegas. But I'm kind of curious about, how do you pull that off for the married folk who are running a business or trying to do a startup or trying to grow a business? How do you successfully pull that off? Because that's a good story in and of itself, right?
Yeah, so it's not easy. I think one of the things that helped us is that she wasn't in the business at the very early stage.
Okay.
Because that's really hard. But I needed her help. Really, when the company became too big, it needed processes. She's really good at that.
Oh, she had history too. She had history working for big companies.
Yeah.
Right?
So she knows. She's. We didn't have an HR department.
Yes.
You don't create an HR department at the very beginning, do you? You know, you don't have.
Oh, here they're outsourcing it. Even big companies are outsourcing HR.
You know, so when you have a finance department, et cetera, it becomes, the operations become more complicated. You can't do it all yourself anymore. So that means then she can come in as a COO with a clear set of responsibilities. Because in the beginning, if she were there from the very beginning, we'd just be running around, everybody doing everything.
Right.
And I think that's when tensions can probably be created.
So you would say the timing of bringing your spouse in might be as important as anything else.
Yeah, I wouldn't claim that was intentional. It's just that I needed help, and well, I can do that for you.
Yes.
But it
and then she got sucked in. Yeah. She got sucked in more and more.
Take us back a couple of minutes. We have about 5 or 6 minutes to go to begin with, so I want to let you guys know that. But take us back a couple minutes, because one of the things that I think it's important to do when we're doing these shows is not to assume that everybody knows the kind of the jargon and the things that we talk about, which is really important, especially for new entrepreneurs. Talk about the SaaS, when you say SaaS model, because you hear that a lot. And if you could just briefly explain what that model is, how you get paid, and why that's kind of a popular, model.
And why Keesup was an early version. That's what's really important here.
Yeah. So, software as a service.
Yep.
And this, I think, probably, to give Mark credit, the first well-known company practicing this was Salesforce.com.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And basically, that's the difference, is that instead of paying Microsoft for your Word or Excel license and installing it on your computer, which many people still do, Salesforce.com and other SaaS software is delivered through the browser with nothing installed, and it's on a subscription basis.
Yep.
So everyone prices it per month, but everyone really charges per annum, really. And you pay an annuity. People, I'm sure the listeners will know that Microsoft has also changed this model. Outlook 365 is all through and even your licenses you're now paying per annum. And so, much like a newspaper or magazine, it gives a steady stream of income, an annuity stream, instead of a one-off purchase. So that it allows you to upsell, allows you to change the pricing, etc. So and the venture capitalists like that.
It's called recurring revenue.
Yeah, right. That's good.
To avoid churn, the recurring revenue does recur and gets expanded on. So you're like building this base of referrals that generate recurring revenue that then generate new further referrals to more recurring revenue.
Absolutely.
So in the viral form of this, where you're really landing and expanding accounts, you really can rapidly and virally grow a business if you're lucky enough, like Facebook is.
Well, not only that, you could I know some people at Salesforce as well, and so I've spoke to this a little bit. So the other piece of that is, as you grow and you continue to add value and upgrade and expand those services, let's face it, if you're doing a good job, you also get them locked in. It's almost impossible for a customer to exit that, right, at one point and go find something else.
Yes and no. I mean, I think the way to succeed in today's world is to be open and actually and win the customer on value, not to somehow lock them in. I think long-term that strategy is not a positive strategy. That kind of harkens back to the old days when you had these big ERP systems or whatever, and they would lock you in and migration was impossible. Even upgrading versions was impossible. That's the whole reason the SaaS business started to remove that barrier. But one thing that you remind me of that whole business model gives you is, if you're a enterprise license plus maintenance in the software used to be, and I guess some still are, you have to sell. If you want to have the same revenues as you did last year, then this year you have to make about as many sales as you did last year. With the SaaS model, if we make no sales, as long as we keep our customers happy, our revenues will still be the same, and if we don't raise our prices.
Right.
So that gives you, for instance, that allows us to then spend more attention, more money, more effort on success. How can we provide that value to our customers?
I think, Joe, you do make a point, though. Like Salesforce, which is a great company and a great product, and they built kind of this platform called TechForce around it. But there are a lot of people that actually only use Salesforce as kind of the database.
Right.
The CRM information.
Right.
And then they use other products that sit on top of Salesforce to actually do the analytics. So there are all these spin-off companies that actually provide better analytics on top of that data. And if I'm Salesforce, I'm buying those companies. Well, I'm just buying those companies up.
Well, they just bought one recently.
Yes.
They just did, right.
Because I need to have that best next idea. It's like Keesup's company, Keesup and Asia's company, Predict.X. They're hugely valuable, but someone down the road is going to look at you guys and say, we got to have you.
Yeah.
We got to have you because we want to sit on top of a gigantic IBM database or a gigantic SAP database or some other database. I mean, that seems inevitable to me. I won't predict where Predict.X goes, but if you're asking me what you're building here, a much bigger public company should be looking at this saying, wow, these guys did an amazing job with actually very little capital, just with a lot of motivated people, which is the power of the team, the power of the talent, the power of choosing the right technology to sort of run with. I mean, you've made great choices.
Yeah. Well, also, I think making some decisions, talent, developer talent is really critical, and that's in short supply, certainly in Silicon Valley. So we have an office in Poland now, we have an office in Spain, and basically these are the scientists and developers augmenting our London team.
We'll have to wrap things up here in a minute or so. Jack, do you guys want to give kind of an overview summary and then maybe contact information as well before we close it out today?
Sure. So I just want to make a point because we've been covering these 7 essences, and it goes without saying that you got to have a good team and they've got to be laser focused on the right technology, making the right choices. And then we've talked about what comes next, the financing of the customers. I think Keesup is here to say the customers really should come next because if technology is not really going to solve a customer problem, getting the money doesn't mean you're going to do it. The money will follow, and you may not need it. You may not need the financing, which is hard to believe because most people think you have to have financing. And it's definitely on a checklist, and it'll definitely be something that will be thrown at you. And then how do you, either with the financing or with self-financing or maybe bank financing, scale the thing as you've done, because you're now in multiple countries and now you're back in the U.S., expanding in the U.S., seeing customers in the U.S. And then how do you get ready, having scaled it, for the inevitable bigger players that will start to challenge you, which is called direct competition. And then what are those intellectual properties or other barriers to entry that are going to protect you in the long run to maintain or grow the value from where you're at? So I want you to spend a minute, if we have time, Joe. How did you decide where to land? Because you're not landing your main U.S. office in Silicon Valley, right? You're in somewhere else.
Atlanta.
Right? Atlanta. Okay, Atlanta.
So it is a pretty popular destination now. There's talent there. There are companies actually expanding in Atlanta. So mainly because the availability of talent and the cost of doing business is lower.
And the Delta flights are there. Joe used to work years and decades ago for Delta, right, Joe? Didn't you do work for the airlines business?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And they've definitely got a big hub there in Atlanta. But you specifically chose, even though you were familiar with Silicon Valley because you lived here, not to return to Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I think especially the space we're in, the talent that we need to find, recruiting the same people that Google, Facebook, and Uber are throwing money at just didn't seem like a sensible thing. So but just the one thing on whether you can self-fund, the business model is pretty critical. And I would say if we didn't have a business model, A, it's SaaS, recurring, but B is we insisted payment up front. And sometimes our customers paid us several years up front.
Wow.
So
that's huge.
So we were cash flow positive from the beginning. Allowed us to fund the growth.
Well, you had a selling proposition or a value proposition that must have been just dramatic for them, that they were going to save so much money. So in general, I would say when you have the right team with the right technology and the right customers, it's a magical threesome. And then I'm sure the commercial banks were like, hey, we'd love to have your accounts. We'd love to take all that cash you're bringing in and store it for you for a while and run your checking through it. And
that's a great point. And I guess the other side of that, Jack kind of mentioned it, that if you have revenue and if you have those things in place, that threesome you talked about, then you could even go to a bank and get lines of credit and different things that that won't really erode your equity, right?
That's right.
That's right. So you guys are pretty much the sole owners of the company, right?
So we did that. We got a line of credit from the bank thinking, it'd be nice to have for a rainy day. But, we never drew down upon it and we let it expire.
Wow, that's even a better story.
That's even a better story. Gosh, that's like, man, we don't need banks. Banks are salivating, trying to get Wimbledon tickets to go see some tennis matches and whatnot. So that's a great success story. So PredictX is PredictX.com, right?
That's right.
Tell us the contact information for any customers that might want to call in saying, hey, save me some money.
Yeah.
Pretty much anything to Predict. Something at PredictX.com should get to somebody. Info is good.
Okay.
Info at PredictX.com.
Yeah, or sales
Nice. So I'm Jack Russo at Computer Law Group. Thank you, Joe, for having me on with this great guest. And as you know, people can reach me at jrusso@computerlaw.com or 650-327-9800. We like seeing these great success stories that grow from basic ideas into big businesses, because that's what you are now. You're a big business. You've become a big business, man, and you're staying young, so it's all good. Thank Joe.
That's outstanding. That's a great story. It really is, and I think you could expand on that. We could do another show on an expansion on that. Of all the different companies and stories you read, and Jack knows, I know. I mean, every day we're kind of right in the middle of Silicon Valley, listening to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars are getting pumped into all these companies. That's all you see. And then you realize, hearing a story like yours, how, wait a minute, there's a different way here. And this is great, because a lot of us that are in this little kind of evolutionary bubble, if you will, that's all we kind of get used to. And so this is a great story.
Well, I'll leave you with one sort of thought experiment for some of the entrepreneurs out there who are doing this. Is if you raise at series your seed or A or B, whatever that may be, think of what you could do if you spent no time fundraising.
Amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a big point, because I think Keesup's ultimate punchline is, I don't think he would have been able to grow PredictX in the manner he grew it if he started in Silicon Valley, or even if he started in Atlanta, Georgia. I think circumstances of starting it in England, getting the right team together there, and blossoming with the big account that he was able to get with the National Health Service that made this thing really take off.
That's great. Well, thank you guys. Thank you both. Well, great story, and we'll get this out tonight and get you guys the link to it. But Jack, we'll have to get him on a future show too. That's good information.
Absolutely. In fact, I want to invite his wife Aisha to come to the studio, because she's actually gorgeous and youthful looking too, and she could make a great person that will tell her side of the story about how this played out and how well it's worked out, because I'm sure it's even better.
So we're going to get either some validation or a different story. What do you think?
We'll get the same story. I'm sure it's an even better story. Hey, but we'll look forward to it. But Aisha, we're not leaving you out. We're looking forward to you coming on the show. Maybe we'll do a show from England, because we've never connected Zoom to England. We did this.
We need to do that.
In Austria.
We have to need to do that.
I was in Austria. We should try one from England and in fact, I'd go even further and say, Keesup should think about setting up a radio booth at PredictX London, where he can do a radio show with his wife about tips for married entrepreneurs.
Well, I'll tell you this.
That would be a great show.
Yeah, I'll tell you this before I go. What I'll do is, if you pay for my way to London and pay for the trip, I'll help you set the whole thing up. How's that?
Yeah, he's really good at setting up radio booths. He's helped me set up a radio booth here. Seriously. Show adds a lot of value.
All right, you guys. Great show. Thanks again for calling in.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, take care.
Sure.
This is Joe Choe with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for tuning in. Great show. Be sure to download when you can. And if you haven't, go to anywhere online and just type in Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for checking in. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at RERadiolive.com.